When we think about plan, do, checking and acting, checking is monitoring. It's monitoring the execution of our plans. It's monitoring the intent of our plans. We need to be defining KPIs and performance measures for asset management as a function, not just for the assets and the services and products we deliver. We need to monitor how effectively our objectives, strategies, and plans are being delivered. So that's really the lag indicator. We could use audits, maturity assessments, benchmarking to evaluate performance. We could benchmark internally if we're a larger organization. We could benchmark across industry. We need to, or we should be looking at, where are there gaps and areas for improvement. Again, good asset management isn't just looking at the monitoring and saying, oh, we didn't achieve something. Well, what are we going to do about it? Spending more time on the question than the answer. And then, of course, playing back those results to stakeholders using feedback for continuous improvement. Sometimes the feedback from a stakeholder can actually lead to a real easy lever for improvement, because they will be looking at things differently to us, especially external stakeholders who are recipients of value by way of services and products. But again, an organization that tries to measure everything will ultimately fail. It's too hard to do that. An organization that doesn't measure anything at all is going to be in the same boat. It's down to luck. When we're developing our key performance indicators, key result areas, if they are too vague, there's too many of them, or they feel like they're misaligned with overarching strategy, people will disengage. People won't take them serious. So the clarity of measures is really important. One such thing, as you'll see in the other course, the Art of Smart Asset Management Objectives: specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. So a way around this, of course, is to co-design those KPIs with stakeholders. Because if you're looking at the difference between lead and lag indicators here, the stakeholders that will look at the lag indicators help them execute the work. But of course, the lead indicators help us align with greater value and, of course, help us link clearly to those overarching asset management objectives. When we're assessing performance as opposed to assessing a deliverable or a product, etc., staff may see it as just a compliance exercise. What we need to do is remind people that performance is really the outcome of something, whether it's the outcome of a process, whether it's the outcome of a service or product, etc. We can learn from these assessments. And one of the key learnings that leads into improvement is there an area of the business maybe lacking capability or capacity or both? So if we can actually get staff to actually understand that the assessment of performance isn't a personal thing on them, it's actually an organizational consideration that can help them in the medium to longer term, and sometimes the shorter term too, if the result really stands out that the organization hasn't set that role up for success. It's one thing to monitor results, monitor outcomes, impacts, etc. But if there isn't an element of accountability to that measure, then all of a sudden you've got everyone running around being responsible, but no one's really accountable and wishing to own the work required to get to the outcome. What we need to be able to do is embed that ownership in roles, looking at various dashboards, BI, reporting, etc., looking at lag indicators, lead indicators, and conducting performance reviews. When there's no real ownership to a result, well, it's a talking point. When there's actually accountability of a result, all of a sudden then you get to pivot and say, I need more capacity or capability in my area of the business to help me achieve that result. Because again, good asset management isn't just about looking at the answer, it's actually considering the question. Unfortunately, under the topic of monitoring, we've got this whole issue around transparency and trust. Now, the real risk here is, unfortunately, seen it in my working life. Sometimes leaders may hide or even downplay poor results. That can often be fueled by a bonus being linked to their particular role, reputation, personal reputation, the fear of getting fired. But all it's doing is reducing trust in the entire process. The result is a result. Good asset management is deciding what you're going to do about that. So if we can move to reporting results openly and frame them as always opportunities for improvement, I think that's really key, because you might say, yep, someone's made a mistake or there's been a systemic issue. Okay, do it once, learn from it, move on. But what we need to do is always look at it for how can we improve, because it might not be anything to do with just insubordination or people choosing not to follow the rules, etc. It could be because they really don't understand what's involved and they're not skilled to do so. So again, transparency and trust is a leadership perspective, but it needs to occur at all levels of the business. And that includes frontline operations and maintenance, which is where I come from, right back through to the boardroom. There's always a risk when we introduce new KPIs, or maybe a customer we feel like they're inflicting them upon us. There can be resistance to those new metrics. Some people may not only treat them as a personal challenge for them, but if it's also geared back to, say, in a larger organization, your PDP process, well, then all of a sudden things can change. If we engage people early in and co-design those KPIs, what does it good look like for the organization, where I'm working in the business, working on the business, but also how am I actually improving? So again, if we put then emphasis on why the measure is important. And the other thing I'll say about introducing metrics, just because you can't measure it today with data doesn't mean you shouldn't have it, because I find that is also a convenient excuse sometimes, and it just perpetuates. Even if you can't measure it today, by talking about it, you can actually reduce the resistance to some of these new metrics. And people may even say, gee, we could actually use it over here, or I'd like these other measures because that also helps me in my role in terms of my competency, which then contributes into capability, which of course is capacity for the organization. One thing I learned when I was the general manager of business improvement in a large and complex organization was I always came up with the 3 Ds. I either did it, I would defer it, or I don't do it. But each and every time, to keep that improvement culture going was always to provide feedback to the originator of the request, of the idea. If we can link performance reviews to both the improvement plans, lessons learned, recognition systems, whether it's a HR recognition system, whether it's something to do a bit more commercially, continuous improvement isn't hard to do. But I'll repeat that again. If people have got an idea, you either choose to do it, you choose not to do it, or you defer it. But each and every time against one of those three scenarios, if you play it back to the workforce, you're going to create and sustain buy-in. Okay, alignment back to ISO, two things jump out for me. Section 9.1, monitoring, measurement, analysis, and evaluation, because of course, that's really the outputs of what you're doing, whether that's the intent or actually doing the work. And 9.2, of course, internal audit. Are we actually achieving the results? Are we following the process? Are we getting outcomes from the process? So 9.1 and 9.2 for me directly underpin monitoring. So in summary, asset management performance, monitoring ensures that the organization knows whether its asset management approach is effective and, of course, delivering value. When I was the convener of ISO 55001, we made it really clear throughout the standard. It's the performance of assets, it's the performance of asset management as a function, and it's the performance of the asset management system, all of which are mutually supportive, not mutually exclusive.